Viktor Orban's formula for peace in the Ukraine. Hungary continues to annoy the European Union. The war in Ukraine has taken a backseat in the World on Fire headlines as led by the Israeli-Hamas conflict in Gaza. Despite the demotion in the headlines and its lack of emotional appeal to the activists in the left in the U.S. and Western Europe generated by the Gaza conflict, the war in Ukraine continues with new Russian attacks in the Donbass and Ukraine pressure in the Black Sea. The Ukraine war may not be in the headlines now, but the spending request from President Biden for Ukrainian aid continues to outpace all other aid, with 2 spending requests pending in the House of Representatives with a value of over $100 billion. Despite that, there is one discussion of a peace plan to end the Ukraine war put forward by Hungary that is expected this week at the EU summit. There are currently 2 peace plans that are being pressed to end the war in the Ukraine. There's a 10-point peace plan put forward by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, which with his demands for peace, it includes radiation and nuclear safety, meaning Russia must stop threatening Ukraine with nuclear weapons, and its rebels must leave its occupation of nuclear facilities and allow the IAEA to monitor the sites. Food security. Ukraine must be allowed to sell its agricultural products to the world market through the Black Sea. Energy security. Russia must stop targeting Ukraine energy sources and exercise price restrictions from Russian energy sources that Ukraine may buy from Russia. Release all prisoners and deportees. This includes women and children that were forcibly relocated to Russia. Implementation of the UN Charter and restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity in the world order. This is light on specifics, but is based on previous statements that include the pre-2014 borders. Withdrawal of Russian troops and cessation of hostilities. This would include ending the support of the pro-Russian insurgency in the Donbass. Justice, which is the appointment of a tribunal to prosecute war crimes. Immediate protection of the environment, restoration of environmental damage from the invasion with an initial cost of $1.5 billion. The protection of escalation. The failures of the Budapest Memorandum must not be repeated, and true security guarantees need to be given to prevent another war. And number 10, confirmation of the end of the war, a formal document declaring an end of the hostilities. This Ukraine list all has some justification due to Ukraine being the party that was invaded, but it's also a list that deserves being called a peace plan in name only. There is no way that this proposal was going to be taken seriously by Russia, even as a starting point of negotiations. That is exactly what happened with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov rejecting it out of hand as being not realistic. The Russians, on the other hand, have not made any formal peace plan outside the Ukraine capitulation, which was Russia's original war aims. This is also not acceptable to the Ukrainians. There is one peace proposal that is being pushed by Hungary's President Viktor Orban, much to the annoyance of the EU, the US, and Ukraine. His proposal lacks specifics, but is also a sobering reminder of the Ukrainian position. He correctly assesses that the war was caused by a failure of diplomacy. I go into more depth in my article, The Failures Leading to the Ukraine War, on Substack. And that Ukraine does not have a battlefield solution that can lead to victory on its own, even with NATO's material help. The only option would be the introduction of NATO troops in Ukraine, and this has been rejected by NATO. The lack of specifics is not the point of Orban's proposal. It is the fact that Ukraine does not have the resources to win a long war with Russia, and not negotiating to the war is pointless for the Ukrainians. The continued fighting serves no purpose other than the loss of lives, destruction of property, the continued loss of money and resources to support Ukraine, in what will be a losing effort. Orban has declared that due to the Ukraine no longer being a functional sovereign state, he echoes Putin. But Orban also met with the Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss energy agreements between Russia and Hungary, so it may have been a statement just to appease the Russians prior to the meeting. Orban is a highly controversial and disliked leader in both the EU and the Biden administration, so he does not carry a lot of influence with the EU or the US. So this fact and Orban's meeting with Putin and its declaration of the Ukrainian state means that Hungary cannot be the arbiter of peace because of the ire that Orban has created with the Ukraine, the EU, and NATO. Hungary not being an arbiter of peace is a correct assessment in that Hungary cannot be viewed as a neutral party, but this does not mean that Orban is wrong. The one specific that he did make that would serve both Ukraine and Russia is that both countries desire and need security guarantees from each other. Russia needs to ensure that Ukraine never becomes part of NATO for its security, and Ukraine must have assurances that Russia will never invade the Ukraine in the future. Again, no specifics were given, but this is the one point that both Russia and Ukraine can understand. It is at least a start to negotiate an end to the war. Any negotiation for peace will be a difficult one, but a necessary one, and while Ukraine still has battlefield leverage, NATO, the EU, and the US concerns will also have to be considered. They must all drop their objective for regime change in Russia. How could any country make changing a leader as a condition to peace? But Russia must not be seen as dictating policy to how the West should behave and conduct its military and foreign affairs. NATO, the EU, and the US are not in direct combat with Russia, but their policies and antagonism to each other exacerbated the war. So all these parties and the direct combatant of Ukraine all must have a seat at the negotiating table.